It is my pleasure to introduce Joe Swope, who will lead today's discussion on government's role in supporting literacy and education. Joe is the manager of media relations and special projects for UGI Utilities, a natural gas and electric utility company serving 700,000 customers in 45 counties in Pennsylvania. Once again, I'm a Marylander, so one in Maryland. Is that right? I got to get that in. Joe will share what UGI has learned in leveraging government funds from the Pennsylvania tax program to support literacy programs for underserved first graders in their service area. The presentation will draw connections between the fundamentals of literacy and the workforce of the future. Joe will share insights on how to navigate partnership between corporations, government, and communities, and how to leverage state resources to create change. Joe has worked for UGI for 25 years. 25 years. 25. I'm barely 25, Joe. That's remarkable.
I'm only 27.
I had to get my reading glasses when I turned 24. And he's responsible for a variety of communications efforts directed at external audiences. In addition, he has managed the unique UGI Reading is Fundamental partnership throughout his career. Joe is an award-winning writer, having authored 3 books, all of which look at children confronting hardship within their community. In addition to his experience at UGI, Joe has served as an adjunct faculty member in communications at Alvernia University in Reading, Pennsylvania, and previously worked at Alvernia University as a director of public relations. So please join me in welcoming Joe.
Good afternoon. Well, it's late afternoon. You've all been sitting here since 9 o'clock in the morning. You're tired, and that's why they put me here, because I'm the loudest one they could find. It's been really been a terrific discussion today, and you're going to find throughout my remarks that this is not really scripted. It's sort of a rough outline. Part of that is because my old boss always accused me of thinking with my mouth open. But I think there's an advantage to that, because as I listened to all the different presentations today, there were some things I could relate to and maybe be able to gauge our own experiences, off of those. And one of the things that I've mentioned to a couple people is that some of these stories are going to sound remarkably alike. There's a lot of best practices that cross a lot of different initiatives, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the fact that some of us have sort of repeated sort of the same mantra over and over gives an indication that we're doing something right. We got a long ways to go, obviously, but we are doing something right. I'm going to talk to you today about UGI and our long-standing commitment to early childhood literacy. UGI, as Alicia said, we're a natural gas and electric utility. We have 700,000 customers in 45 counties in Pennsylvania, and yes, one in Maryland. When I actually started in 1993, we only had 14 counties and 300,000 customers. But since then, we've purchased the former PG Energy, and we've purchased the former PPL Gas. And so between that and a lot of organic growth, if you we're in Pennsylvania, you may have heard of something called Marcellus Gas, Marcellus Shale Gas. That has given a huge boon to the natural gas industry overall, and Pennsylvania in particular. So we've been very fortunate to be able to take advantage of that. Just so you know, there's a lot of UGIs, so let me just set the record straight. UGI Utilities, that's us. We're the utility company. We are a regulated utility. Our parent company is UGI Corporation. UGI Corp is a Fortune 500 company based in Valley Forge. You may have also heard of UGI Energy Services, which is our non-regulated marketer. AmeriGas, which is the largest propane company in the United States, as well as I don't know how many companies we own in Europe, but we have a whole UGI international piece as well. So we're part of the UGI family. Our service territory looks like this. The blue area is all our different natural gas service regions. The green is we have one little electric division with about 60,000 customers in Luzerne and Wyoming County outside of Wilkes-Barre. So we do have a little bit of electric. So let me go jump right in to how we got to where we are. In the late 1980s, we had a number of our senior management express some concern about the lack of cohesion in our company's community relations efforts. They were giving money away. Nobody really knew where we were giving it. It was really difficult to measure the impact. We weren't really getting any credit for what we were doing. And so there was a lot of angst about we were really not really getting any bang for the buck. So there was actually a year-long study that went through trying to decide what we should do, and part of the focus was we should really focus on one main area where we could have an impact and make a difference. And looked at a lot of different things. Homelessness and affordable housing when you're a utility company makes a lot of sense. There was a couple of public health initiatives, again, make a lot of sense. But when it came down to it, we decided to focus on improving education and early childhood literacy as being a component of that. And there was a lot of good reasons for that. And one thing, and this all happened before I actually arrived at UGI. I think my hiring was a byproduct of all this. I'll give the company a lot of credit for looking at the overall economic picture in the long view. We're a utility company. Our gas mains we have 12,000 miles of underground gas mains. We have thousands of miles of electric lines. We have, 31, 34, 32 different buildings. We have 1,000 trucks. We can't dig up our facilities and move. We are tied to the vitality of our company is directly tied to the vitality of the communities we serve. Okay, and that means that the students of today are our future employees. They're our future customers. They're the future business leaders. They're the future government officials and regulatory officials that are going to ultimately make us hopefully successful. And so when we looked at that, we took education and said this is the long view. We have to do something that's sustainable over time, that's going to have a long-term impact to the health and vitality, not just of us, but of the communities we serve. Because the more prosperous, the more successful, the more educated our customers are, the more successful we are going to be as a company. So yes, for those of you in nonprofits, and I worked in nonprofits for 10 years, it sounds a little selfish, okay? But you know what? In business, that's how you get things. That's how you get things approved. What's in it for us? How can we continually sustain the success of our company? Okay, and at the same time, UGI's been around since 1882. We're over 135 years old. We've been in Pennsylvania that entire time. We were founded in Philadelphia. We have been part of that community for a long, long time, and we certainly, are committed to the success of those communities. But right here, one of the things that I want to make the point is we're really embedded in the community. We're a utility company. We can't, pack up and leave. We have a franchise service territory that's defined by the State Public Utility Commission. But despite that, any business in the community has maybe not quite the same, anchor there, but they have buildings there, they have employees there, they have facilities there. Every business has that stake to some level or another to the success of the communities, and that's a message. I have some stories to tell about that, but that's a message that sometimes gets lost. But we're probably the perfect example, but there's a lot of other perfect examples along the way that make sense. But we really took early childhood literacy, as we looked at education improvement in general. We looked at a couple different initiatives, career awareness and other, and technical education. But we really focused on early childhood literacy, and we did a lot of research. And the premier, foremost early childhood literacy organization that we could find was RIF, and thus started our partnership with Reading is Fundamental. It made sense because we looked at early childhood literacy as the first step in economic and workforce development. If you can't read, you can't learn. You're going to struggle throughout your academic career. If you struggle through your academic career, your career option, your higher educations are limited. If your higher education's options are limited, your career options are limited. So it starts with there. Now, I'm going to divert, again, not in my slides, but I will tell the story about Fred Hartwigson, who was the Vice President of Public Affairs at UGI for a long time. He's the one who hired me. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately. If Fred was here, he'd be giving the presentation, except you get 3 times more information because he talked that much faster than I do. But Fred was having a conversation with Paul Rodell, who was at that point the former CEO of Carpenter Steel, who was a very large steel manufacturer in the Berks County area where we're located, and Paul had retired and become the president of the local business education partnership. And Fred and Paul were having somewhat of an argument over the importance of early childhood literacy. And Paul, in his steel manufacturing mentality, kind of passed off literacy as that's a nice thing to do, but that doesn't really get to what we really got to get done. Okay, couple years later, Paul Rodell came back to Fred after having a few years in the BBEC and really getting a better understanding of the education landscape. And he came back and said to Fred, he said, "You know what? I was wrong." He said, "If you don't start with literacy, we can't get anything else done." So, so it took a little while, to convince people. But I'm convinced that this is why we've been doing this since 1991. We're going to be going into our 28th year. We've survived our RIF commitment has survived 3 chairmen and 5 presidents. Okay. You don't know how hard that is, if you haven't been in a corporation. Every president wants to come in and make his own mark. We have survived 3 chairmen and 5 CEOs because we have embedded it into the success of our company. So I think I've gone right past this one. But anyway, we did focus on putting the books in the hands of children, especially in urban settings where poverty and ESL were prevalent. If you know anything about Pennsylvania, especially eastern and southeastern, central and southeastern Pennsylvania, where we're located, we don't serve Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, but pretty much the rest of the state. Reading has made the list of one of the poorest cities in the country for about the last 5 or 6 years. About 5 years ago, it was the poorest. I think they're up to about 9th. Still got a long way to go. It's about a population about 65% Hispanic. There's also very significant Hispanic populations in Harrisburg, Lancaster, Allentown, Hazleton, a lot of our urban settings. All those schools are struggling with ESL. I heard, 25 or 30 languages spoken, but, a significant number of students who don't speak English as a primary language and are just learning English. And one of the things we've done is we have given a lot of those schools order books in both English and Spanish. And it does, and the remarkable thing about that is you never know how far a RIF book will go. I learned long ago, somebody from RIF told me, he said, we give those English Spanish books and they come, and the kids take them home and teach their parents English. And I was telling that story because I assume that probably happened with us. I was telling that story to a group of employees about 5 years ago, and one of them raised their hand and said, that was me 20 years ago. So one of the great benefits that we can't measure is how far that book goes. How many generations does that book actually touch? And again, help lead to that goal of making those members of the community more successful. We talked about being fully integrated into the economic fabric of the communities. That's what we need to do, and hopefully continue to do so. One of the other unique aspects of our RIF partnership is we funded first grades in schools throughout our service territory. We have yet to turn a school down. If they ask and they're in our service territory, we fund them. We also provide volunteers. Employee volunteers are able to go out. And we have multiple goals for that. Because we didn't want to just get employees out to schools and volunteer. We wanted employees to become familiar with school settings. A lot of those employees hadn't been in a school, in any meaningful way since they graduated. Okay, and our hope was if we get them in schools, if we get them to know teachers, if we get them to understand the educational process, maybe they'll become more involved in other aspects of education. They'll better understand what their child is learning. They might get involved in the PTA, or whatever the case may be. So part of our goal was to help employees become more involved with schools. Okay, we adopted a time release policy that allowed employees to volunteer for education-related activities. We're not quite as generous as Guy, but we do give 16 hours of paid time off in time release that they can use for education activities. We initially followed the 75-25 model. For those of you who have been with RIF for that long, back when there was a lot of federal funding with RIF, the federal model was the grant would fund 75% of the books, and they'd have to find a 25% local source. We gave that up a number of years ago because we found out that what happened was the 25% local funding source wasn't always really reliable. We got a call from a school district one year that said, well, the PTA, she's not here, is she? But the local PTA was our local funding source, but they decided to buy playground equipment instead this year, and they didn't tell us. So we had schools that didn't have a 25% match and were trying to buy books, with 75% of the money they were supposed to, and then they were having trouble buying books. So we said, you know what, this is not worth it. So we adopted the 100% model to fund. So those books they don't have to go find a funding partner. Everything they get is free. The other thing we do is there's, as if you're a part of RIF, they have 3 book distributions that are supposed to be somehow literacy related. We created a life-size character that would visit schools. We would offer them to schools at no charge to visit schools during one of their book distributions each year. And that was the Reading Wizard. The Reading Wizard knows everything there is to know because he's read every book that's ever been written. He has a wand that lights up whenever it comes close to a book. And there's a coloring book. When the Reading Wizard appears, the kids actually get 2 books because we wrote a coloring book called The Story of the Reading Wizard that talks about the importance of literacy. Our initial Reading Wizard costumes lasted a good 25 years. 2 years, a year ago, we decided to refresh them, and so that's actually our new wizard costume that is still rocking. I was just on with the costume maker the other day, ordering 2 more. So we are refreshing our wizard costumes. There's also a puppet version, which I usually use and usually get timeouts, because of the ruckus that I create with the kids. But that's a story for another day. So one of the things that I did want to talk about real quickly was some of the challenges that you can face. And one of the challenges that we faced was when RIF lost its federal funding in 2011. A lot of schools assumed that they lost all their federal funding. Some schools decided that, well, if we only have RIF for 1 grade, we're not going to commit resources to running a RIF program anymore. There were schools such as Reading, again, a real poor school that was running RIF from K through 6. They had a couple of corporate partners use federal funding for the rest. They were down to 1 grade. I have to tell you, we used Jerry Maguire earlier today. I'm going to go to Pulp Fiction. If you remember the Wolf, Harry Keitel, the fixer who got them out of the mess. Well, I'm the Wolf. Not only because I'm there, I'm 30 minutes away. I'll be there in 10, but also because I'm the one that comes up and fixes things when they get screwed up. So I can't tell you how many times our community relation managers called me and said, we need to save the Bethlehem School District because they're going to drop RIF. I said, no, they're not, but we got to go convince them that these are free books. This doesn't cost you anything, but took us a lot of work, took us a lot of one-on-one meetings, but we did. We didn't save them all. And again, Reading, even to this day, where they used to have K through 6, only has 1st grade. And I think one of the issues that I think we have to face in general is, UGI has become so well known in for RIF in our service territory that other companies are like reluctant because they'll somehow get less benefit because it's UGI's program. We got to get over that. We got to get over the fact that this might be somebody else's program and work together as a partnership and really address the literacy issue. That's another whole discussion to have, but that's one issue that we have to face. So got to talk about. We got 4 minutes and 45 seconds to talk about this. So education improvement tax credits in 2001. Pennsylvania became one of the first states to enact Pennsylvania improvement tax credits. EITC credits, what they do is allows you to up to a 90% tax credit for donations to approved education improvement organizations. It's kind of a complicated deal. The organization has to be approved by the Department of Community and Economic Development, and the granting corporation has to put in an application and be approved because there's only so many tax credits available. I think right now there's $60 million worth of tax credits available. What has happened, though, is that has allowed us to really expand our EITC commitment. Not only do we, RIF is an approved EIO, but it also allowed us to expand to a number of other literacy commitments, such as we now fund a whole slew of summer reading programs at local libraries to try to address summer slide. The one provision that I say, how summer libraries like to give away like Marvel, Avenger figures or, stuffed dinosaurs or stuff as prizes. I said, no. I said, we'll buy books that you can give to kids, and take home. I'm not buying toys. I'll buy books. And they grumble a little bit, but then they They take the money. Interestingly enough, 25 years after we started the UGI RIF program, the Berks County United Way said, you know what, we have a major literacy problem in Berks County, and we ought to address it, and started a program called Ready, Set, Read that was designed to help students at risk and reading below grade level to get up to grade level. We became one of the founding sponsors of that program. In addition to the literacy initiatives, we have a lot of STEM initiatives. Somebody talked about, we're a utility company. I'm an island of communicators in a ocean of engineers. We're a very technically based program, both inside and outside in the crew. Outside in our field crews, we've supported a lot of STEM programs designed to bring more females and more minorities into those technical careers and career exploration and awareness programs as well. Pennsylvania has expanded EITC over the year. We can now request up to $750,000 in annual tax credits. I had to have the accounting people do this for me because math is not my specialty, but that equals donations of $833,333. That's not the extent of our donations. We probably give $1.5 million or so, in things that are, in combination. There's different types of credits: education improvement organizations, scholarship organizations, pre-K scholarship organizations, and something called opportunity scholarship tax credits. A lot of those are designed for specialty schools, like schools that are designed for those hard of hearing or have sight issues or something like that. So Pennsylvania has pretty consistently supported EITC, and it has been a great boon to a lot of organizations trying to help schools, and other organizations that support education. So that's now the one thing I will say is I think we're pretty generous in our donations. But one of the issues, and I think somebody alluded to it along the way, is there's never enough money to go around. For every $1 we hand out in a donation, I think we get $15 in requests. Okay, I think we actually did that study once. So, so it's difficult, and it's not that these organizations aren't worthwhile. It's just there's only so much money to go around. All right. I'm out of time, so I'm going to go over this real quickly. Since 1991, over 1.4 million books have been distributed to first grade students, to more than 400,000 students, a number of whom are still now in the workforce, some of whom work for UGI. Employees have contributed a minimum of 30,000 hours. They don't always put it on their timesheets. They're supposed to, but they don't always. And we support students in literacy programs in more than 50 school districts in Pennsylvania, including all the urban school districts in our service territory. We've celebrated our 20th and 25th anniversaries. In 2011, we brought Henry Winkler, who's also, in addition to the Fonz, and in addition to only being about 5'5", is a children's author and was terrific. One of the things I think that we've done that's been terrific is each year the top photo shows our CEO on the steps of the Capitol, of the state Capitol, with the number of students. And what we've done is in both of those years, we got RIF and Scholastic worked with us to bring 2,000 books up to the Capitol. We laid them out in tables. We invited all the members of the General Assembly and their staffs to come down and pick a book. We had all our senior management team there. They got to personally talk with a number of legislators, talk about the importance of literacy, and it was like the perfect vortex of, this is what we do. These are the kind of books we hand out, and this is why we think literacy is important. And, I can't tell you how many legislators stop and talk to us for a long, long time, a lot more time than they would normally give us. because those of you who are in government, usually are on the clock. This was their time that they gave us, which was really pretty nice. So generally, commitment to literacy, where we're at now, our commitment is recognized throughout the Commonwealth. It's expanded from RIF to a number of initiatives, and we have a broader community that's starting to recognize literacy as a critical step toward economic and workforce development, and we have a state that supports literacy through tax credits. So we've made progress. Still a long way to go, but there's some things to build on. So with that, since I've through my time, so I'm going to bring up the panel. My panel is great. I've gotten a chance to talk to them throughout the day. They know a lot more about literacy in government than I do. I'm sure they're going to have some terrific insights. So we have, and as I call your name, please come up, Allie Kimmel. She is Allie Kimmel is a senior education policy advisor for the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee under Senator Patty Murray. Patty Murray is the ranking member of the committee and one of our Champions of Children's Literacy Award recipient today. In her post, Allie handles K-12 education, early childhood education, and child welfare issues for the committee. Previously, she was a legislative assistant for Congressman Jared Polis in the U.S. House of Representatives and a research assistant for education policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Please note that we ask Allie's comments be off the record for the duration of the panel. Welcome, Allie. So next we have Jesse Lyons from one of my favorite organizations, Scholastic. As head of government relations for Scholastic, and I will tell you, I've said this to Jesse and a couple of other people from Scholastic. Scholastic has been a terrific partner. I know they've been a terrific partner with RIF. We've worked with them directly on a couple of things, and you really can't ask for a better partner in children's literacy than Scholastic, and my hat's off to them. Where was I? As head of government relations for Scholastic, Jesse engages directly with the CEO and other members of the Management Executive Committee and their senior vice presidents, identifying risks and determining legislative opportunities for their respective businesses. She is regularly in Washington, D.C., advocating for education policy and funding that will have a positive impact on the lives of those children most in need and at risk. Jesse regularly identifies or creates strategic public-private partnerships for Scholastic that furthers the mission of encouraging the intellectual and personal growth of all children, beginning with literacy. Finally, we have Dr. Beth Karen. Dr. Karen is the Program Director for Early Care and Education at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, where she and the team provide research synthesis, policy analysis, and resources on education topics spanning early childhood through college and career. Dr. Karen has more than 25 years' experience in the field of early childhood special education and early learning, including 9 years at the Department of Education. Most recently, Dr. Karen was an associate director at AEM Corporation, supporting the 20-state Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grantees. So please welcome our panel. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Like I said, you guys know a lot more about the partnerships between government and private than perhaps I do. So let me just start with a general question that you can all answer is, let's do some, baseline stuff here and tell me about, what each of you do, what organization. We got a Governors Association, we have a corporation, and we have the Senate. So I'm not sure how you lump those all into one. But tell me, what kind of work you do that supports literacy.
Sure. So today is a super boring day in the U.S. Senate. Today I watched the TV, but normally I've been handling a whole bunch of issues for Senator Murray for about 4 years. I worked on the reauthorization of ESSA of No Child Left Behind, where we really prioritize literacy and early learning and all sorts of issues that we know are tied in that. So sometimes we're negotiating, sometimes we're Betsy DeVos's, favorite pen pal she never asked for. And so I find that, every day is different, but I work for a boss who is a former preschool teacher, and so it's generally about children, and literacy is one of her passions.
And we thank you for that. I do government relations for the company. Scholastic's the largest publisher and distributor of children's books worldwide. We not only distribute our books, we distribute other publishers' books because we know how important choice is for kids. And so we distribute other publishers' books through about anywhere from 85 to 95% of the schools in this country. We have some program that are in those schools, so it's not actually just books. It's professional learning. It's actually about to be a full literacy curriculum. So we do a whole host of different things. Most people know Scholastic nostalgically, I think, for book fairs or book clubs. People will talk about the smell that they associate with the flyer or the smell that they associate with the book fair, regardless of whether I'm talking to an 80-year-old or an 8-year-old. So yeah, we try and make sure that books get into the hands of kids, that we instill a joy of reading and a love of reading, because that's how you have engaged learning, and it's the foundation for all learning. So I would say at the simplest level, we give away over 1 million books a year. And more than that, because a lot of people give away books and they don't report it in the company, which is fine. But yeah, so I think at the simplest level, we try and infuse books into society by both selling them and giving them away.
Great.
Well, I think at the National Governors Association, we do whatever the governors tell us. Because we are...
and just to interrupt you, I mean, we had Dane here talking
Yes.
a lot about the National Governors Association. A little later on, we're going to ask you for an update
Yes,
on some
I'll
of the
just
things.
recreate all of his talking points. He gave you everything you needed to know. But because we're a member organization, we really are focused on whatever the issues are that the governors are interested in. And somebody actually said to us once, one of our governor's advisors who we work most closely with, said that most of the governors are workforce governors. They come in with workforce being one of their major issues that they care about. But even if they come in as a workforce governor or a transportation governor or energy governor, whatever their thing might be, they always leave as education governors because they realize education is the key to so much of the success that their state is going to have. So any success they get is going to be on the backs of, if you will, their citizens, right? And we know that the literacy piece is the most important piece of the education component. Like if you're going to think about education, you have to think literacy first. It's really the foundation. So we go in a number of ways and help them support their policy agendas and figuring out the ways that education becomes part of it, and then the way literacy can be fitted in there as well. So we'll talk more about it.
Sounds good. So let's go back to Allie. So I'm going to ask you a tough one. So, because from the outside looking in, there doesn't look to be any bipartisan consensus on anything in this city right now. But when you look at education, do you see any hope for some bipartisan consensus?
That's a hard question. Well, I mean, you've seen a lot of partisan fighting. We have certainly had our fair share of partisan fighting over the last 2 years. I mean, the confirmation process with Betsy DeVos was the most partisan time I've ever seen, and most people have ever seen with the Senate. And so it doesn't look like we're going the right direction, but there are some really exciting points where we actually have been working across the aisle. We just worked on a bill on the opioid crisis. And it's a huge bill. There's tons and tons of things in it. And one piece that we were able to get in, and I worked with my colleague across the aisle with Alexander's staff to get new grants, $50 million for trauma-informed care in schools. Okay. So really thinking about the ripple effects of the opioid crisis on children and families. New grants to address neonatal absence syndrome, new data collection on ACEs across the country, so we'll know and researchers will be able to figure out how adverse childhood experiences are affecting later outcomes in life. So that's totally education, and it's totally bipartisan, so we have both.
So we accomplished something. So.
Yes, and actually I should have mentioned too that we're the LHHS bill. Yeah. For the first time in 10 years, we are passing a labor, health, and human services appropriations bill, and everyone's like, oh my God, you did such a great job. And we're like, no, like that's a budget. It needs to be done before the fiscal year ends. But this will be the first time in 10 years that we have actually done that.
Well, and you reauthorized No Child Left Behind, which was very bipartisan and was long overdue, so.
It was exhausting.
Okay, so Jesse, let's, I know that Scholastic has some unique partnerships that you've developed with local governments and things like that. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about them and and talk about how they might be replicated elsewhere?
Absolutely. We have partnered with, a host of different people at the federal, state, and local level. Locally, this is one I've worked on recently. We did a mayor's initiative in a city in Massachusetts where they had probably a 50% proficiency in third grade in terms of their reading level. And we took the mayor, who has a really unique position in the community, obviously he or she has a bully pulpit, in this case it was a he, to both activate, obviously school districts in some most cases, the local community organizations that range from the library to the zoo to the hospitals, to actually having a direct line of communication with citizens, parents, and things of that nature in the community. And so we thought going after sort of the mayor as the central point for literacy in that community would be an interesting way to sort of reach all of those points and infuse literacy into the community. So we did neat things like the mayor called a meeting with 40 community partners. I mean, we couldn't have gotten 40 community partners together, particularly 40 community partners that touch kids but maybe don't have literacy as a focus. So the people that do the summer boating initiative in their community, it ran the gamut, but he was able to pull together super fast all these community partners, and because he was there and in the room, they all shockingly expressed a deep interest in literacy and helping the community be, we used the municipal water bill and attached some reading information to that to get that into, 25,000 homes in the community. Neat things like that. We had volunteers that, did canvassing and door knocking to talk about signing up for library cards and distributing books and things of that nature. So sort of a little bit more creative ways to get into the community. We did that locally, and it was great. And I think it's easily replicable across the country because those systems are in place across every community, regardless of what that community looks like. I think there has to be an appetite for it, and has to be funding for it, and we obviously donated, in this particular instance, most of the materials, including professional learning, which we did. Some of the previous speakers, Tim, I believe, was speaking about the need to not just dump books or whatever, but to do actual professional learning around that. So we did professional learning with the community partners and whatnot. So it's simple, replicable, and unique in some ways, and there has to be an appetite, though, by the mayors to want to do it. So, and they have big issues on their plate, so. We partner with the feds on the census. So we do the Census in Schools program with the federal government for the past 3 decennials. So making sure that families that might be uncomfortable with the census and maybe hard to reach through some ways, but all go to school or to a pediatrician's office or something like that. In this case, it's the census, so it's through schools, and reaching them and educating them about the census and what's important about it, and that it's okay to fill it out and why it's important, both for funding and things of that nature. And then state governments, we partner with governors. We partner with almost all the governor's spouses across the country, and they serve as reading ambassadors to go around their states and talk about the summer slide and avoiding that, and we give them books that they can distribute in that effort. So all of this is scalable and doable. Again, there has to be a will and a partnership to make that happen.
Great. Thank you very much. So we've already teased, that things are happening at the National Governors Association. You want to tell us some of the things?
I was just thinking of what Jesse was saying about the will, right? It is about the will. And so part of what's happening at the state level is really trying to encourage that will to go in positive directions. There are a lot of things governors are concerned with. Opioid crisis is a huge one, for instance. School safety is also a huge one. The good news there is we can help move the conversations. So we can acknowledge the need for, more secure facilities or whatever is the issue du jour, but we can also talk about the need for those softer skills and those mental health supports and the other things that wrap around students' needs, and literacy can even fit into that, right? So we look at what the interest of the governors is, and then we try to help them figure out where to meet that. But right now is an incredibly exciting time. I mean, you probably are all hearing stories that this is the year of the governor. And that's because there are 36 elections in states and 3 additional elections in territories. So there's 39 elections happening this year. At least 18, I think that's right, Tiffany, right? At least 18 governors are sure to turn over this year, either because they lost their primaries, they're not running again, or they're term limited out. So we're going to have at least 18 new governors, and we're going to have who knows how many more beyond that, because we have as many races as we have. So what we're doing is we're watching to see what they're talking about now. What are they talking about in their primaries, in their platforms, in their press conferences, their releases, everything that's going out, and tracking what their issues are. And right now, in just the preliminary work that we've done so far, 18 of the candidates that have won their primaries are talking about literacy and early literacy in particular. Wow. So it is an issue that they care about, enough to talk about it right now at this moment in time. Partly because it is a good bipartisan issue, as is early childhood, so that's another one they're talking about a lot. We're trying to pair those two together, really, and make sure that, because we can talk about this later, that early childhood can be a strategy to help you improve your literacy. Right. So, there's a lot that's happening in the states now. We're watching very closely. So the year of the governor.
Year of the governor. Okay, mark that down. Not the year of the House of the Senate.
Nope,
it's the
not the year of the House of the Senate.
To be determined.
Okay, Allie, so let's talk about, I think one of the themes of the day has been literacy and its link to workforce development. Can you talk a little bit about how the committee views that, how Senator Murray views that, thinking about how does literacy work into the funnel that becomes a economic and workforce development piece?
I mean, in some ways, it's infused in everything that we do in the Help Committee. So, on the Education Committee, we have early childhood, we have K-12, we have workforce, we have higher ed. I mean, when she talks to businesses in our state, they are the #1 advocates for early childhood education. Yeah. That is what they talk about. I actually was just out there and sort of like stumping for her with a bunch of businesses, and I expected to be talking about CTE or some of the higher ed issues, and they were like, no, we just are so interested in childcare and early learning and infant care, and they know that that's how they're going to fuel their workforce. And so I think you are seeing, like Beth said, this is about early childhood. It's about getting kids early, and that has the real implications for workforce. And that's been her biggest area of focus. I think we've done a lot in the CTE space and in the adult literacy space, but we haven't done, in K-12 as well. But early childhood is really our passion in that.
Great.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Can we take over the panel?
I'm channeling Joe. Do you hear the businesses saying that they want to invest in this, like in community partners that are doing work in this space, or do you just hear we're concerned about it, we understand the importance of it, or what's their response? Because politicians, we took this mayor's thing that I referred to earlier and actually took it to 15 mayors. Through a Bloomberg thing, and they all loved it, but they all said we don't have the funds to invest in this, and essentially, who knows if we'll be here in 2 years to, so I'm curious, somebody.
It's short-sighted.
It is, and it's
my term ends in 2 years.
Right, which I get. I mean, that's not lost on me. I come from a career of politics, so I get it. But at the same time, so I wonder, somebody has to step in, right? Are you hearing that they're willing to do that, or they just have an understanding of the value in it?
Yeah.
I think both. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen more businesses say, we will actually provide this for our workforce, and that's really exciting to us. One of the things that happens in early learning often is, one of the challenges we have is that all early learning programs need to be on the first floor, right? Because anytime you go to an early learning center or a preschool, I went with my Republican colleague the other day, and she was like, there are these tiny toilets there, tiny ones. And I was like, that's why it's so expensive, because you have to renovate the entire building, and it has to be on the first floor, and it's hard to find. And so one of the businesses I was just talking with in Washington was like, we're just putting our preschools on our first floor, and we're saying to the state, we will give you this space and you do the rest, but we're going to give you this space and you prioritize our workforce and we will have a partnership. And that's the most exciting to me, because I think for a while they've been talking about this, but there are ways that they could really make a difference, and I think that's one of them.
And an important entree in is the Chambers of Commerce. So I was asked to come down and join a full-day meeting. The National Chamber of Commerce put it on, but for local chambers. And the state chambers, the whole group came together for an entire day to talk about early learning. All of these folks put their days aside, their works aside, just to come down and just talk early learning for the entire day. And it was incredible. These people were like, we really care about early care and education. How do we get involved? What do we need to do? So a lot of this is really, as we talked about throughout the day, the partnerships, really trying to figure out how to make those connections. Find your chambers of commerce, talk to them, figure out what their interests are. That's a great place to make a match, because they know the local issues, they know the local context. So we're bringing some of those folks to talk to some of the governors and to governors' advisors. So we're trying to make that match on our end, but it can happen all over.
Yep. So Jesse, I have a question that I can relate to a lot, because we both work for corporations. I think it's sometimes difficult to work with a government agency or a regulatory agency without it appearing that they're endorsing you as a private company. I mean, I know we've had some PUC events, some groundbreakings where we've invited the PUC and they weren't allowed to wear the UGI hard hat because that would somehow look like they were endorsing UGI. So how do you deal with, what kind of strategies do you use where government and a private company can work seamlessly, like?
Yeah, it's not easy. State and local tends to be easier than federal.
Except me, I'm super fun.
You're super
And we work together.
The Obama administration actually did a big event where they were pushing pre-K for all. You probably remember this a couple of years ago. And anecdotally, I will tell you a very short but funny story, and then I will get to the piece about implementation. But the White House called and asked if Clifford, the big red dog, could come and introduce Vice President Biden at the White House as they were rolling out this pre-K initiative. Are all of our comments off the record or just Allie's?
All of them, yeah.
Well, if you need it off the record.
Anyway, so yeah, they asked if he could, and I said, Clifford would love to be at this event, of course. We're donating 1 million books towards it, and I'll get into that piece in a second. And they said, great, if he could be on stage and intro Vice President Biden to the stage, that would be terrific. And I said, well, you know Clifford's a dog, and so he can't talk, right? And he's like, yeah, but it's a guy in a suit, right? And I said, yeah, but it's still a dog, and the dog can't talk. And we had this very circular conversation. We better move on. Let's just move on. So anyway, it is difficult, I think, to work with governments, only because I appreciate the need to appear like you're not endorsing somebody. We had committed 1 million books to this initiative to pre-K for all, and our proposal to the feds, for lack of a more whatever term, was that we'd give 1 million books to this initiative, or it was over $1 million worth of books, and professional learning. So again, to the point of making sure that we do those in combination. And we said, we'll do that through the preschool development grant winners and the early Head Start grant winners, thinking they're already getting funding, so we'll couple this book donation and this professional learning to help augment that. And the infrastructure existed. We knew who was getting what. We knew recipients, and it was there. There was great enthusiasm for all of that. We announced it at the White House, and it was terrific. And then it came time to actually push the message out about doing this, about the fact that everybody had an option to do this, right? It wasn't like Pearson was excluded or something like that. I mean, everybody was welcome to join this initiative. Who stepped up and for what reasons, they'll only know. But so when it came time to actually push our offer out beyond the press release that went out with all these other companies giving all sorts of different things, the department didn't necessarily execute it. So while we gave away a lot of books, but nobody did the professional learning that went with it because they didn't really. So it was, and they did it because they didn't want to seem as though they were endorsing somebody. But I think transparency is a really critical piece of all of this, and so being transparent about what you're asking of people, whether it's a corporation or whomever. I think being transparent about the fact that it's open for anybody to offer their help, I think can go a long way. But yeah, it's a little bit of a stumbling block. I think the law that was reauthorized was really explicit, saying that you're allowed to partner with private, they didn't say corporations, but private entities, nonprofits. They were explicit in saying that in the new law, which I think is a step towards encouraging state, local, cooperation. But yeah, I think nobody wants to be called out as you're endorsing Scholastic, but at the same time, be transparent, be open. I think that will mitigate against some of that, but it is a challenge.
Great. Beth, I'm going to follow up with sort of a similar question. So, if a private entity, since we'll use that term, wants to work with a governor's office at the state level, what's the best way to do that? How do you approach that?
Well, and I think probably the easiest, and I'm going to a little off, like take my hat off a little bit for that too, because I don't work with the folks that actually make sure that happens, right? But just from my experience being there, and from my experience as a former Fed, and there are important and easy ways to think about this work, and that's probably the most critical is probably making it data driven. So if you look at what your data is, you have data that shows this is what we need, then who's coming forward with the solutions, and again, the transparency. So if a governor shows an interest in something, because obviously they'd have to have an interest or you wouldn't have the door even open for you, right? Don't bother knocking on doors that are like locked in your face. Go to the doors that are a little ajar. So if you find the interest there, then go to them with the data. This Business Roundtable report is so important. There are other pieces of data that are really important as well. Like the Center for American Progress just came out with these one-pagers of every state that show like how many kids are actually in early care and education. What's the median salary for like your child care workers? It has all these great data points on one fact sheet. If your business community, if somebody in your community finds an area where there's really a need and it aligns with something a governor's interested in, then those data points are your way in. And then you say, all right, now who is interested in solutions? Be proactive and be open about that transparent option for solutions. And then whoever comes in to fill that gap is already the right solution for and so you've built it in the way that you've set it up, right? Come in with the data, come in with the solutions, and then obviously no one's going to turn solutions away. So as long as they can see that there are folks who have a legitimate answer to the problem, then then the governor figures out whether he wears the hard hat or not. But that's the easy stuff once you get to the.
All right, so I'm going to throw a question to all of you, and this is sort of the open-ended one. I mean, we have a room full of people that recognize the importance of literacy, to the success of our future generations. What's the one or two things? I won't be counting. But what's the most important thing that you want them to walk away with from your perspective?
Sure, I'll go first. Then my other view will steal what I'm going to say. If I had to pick one or two things, I would probably say use existing infrastructure that is there and think creatively about it. When I hear Allie talk about this, having to put preschools on the first floor and whatnot, I think of like find a real estate person and find a preschool provider and find a book provider and find a governor or mayor and get that preschool in there, but get Scholastic commit to books, get the real estate provider to say, I'm going to commit X number of my new builds to having a preschool on the bottom floor and I'm going to give you a discount. Form like those relationships within existing infrastructure, and because why recreate the wheel?
Sure.
Transparency, I think, is really important. Again, I've already said that. I had a third, actually, but now it's left me. It will come back to me as you guys go. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I can stick to one or even two because I just think it's a complicated issue with a lot of complicated potential solutions. One of the things from my personal standpoint is governors come and go. And they've got to figure out how to make their legacy stick for the time that they're there, but you've got to be careful not to hitch everything to someone who's not going to be sticking around. So don't let it be just the governor's thing. Whatever it is, let it be something that the larger community owns. So find the chambers of commerce or business leaders, and again, build that coalition. So come up with an initiative, whether it's reading by third grade, or whether it's increasing access to early care and education, or increasing the quality of your early care and education programs. Or, there's so many ways in which you can enter into this conversation, but find the hook and embed it in the community. Really embed that in as a personal solution so that when the governor comes and goes, that sticks around. Like you've got a whole campaign, a whole initiative that can go on, but then get them involved early. Their bully pulpit and their ability to convene is incredibly powerful. So if you can find your way just to get the conversation started, let them bless it, but let it have a life that goes beyond. The early, I think Dane was the one talking about it earlier. Like every state, most states have an early care and education, an early learning council. Those were funded by the feds a while back. They don't have funding anymore, but a lot of them still exist. They keep going. And the preschool development grants are a new opportunity that's out there for states now. So get a group together that cares about this and is dedicated to it. Let them be the one who owns it, and then get the governor involved in making sure it continues. So.
I remembered my third thing. Make the partnerships mutual. Don't come to businesses and just say, we want this. Because while I might be able to give you 500,000 books one day or 1 year, that's not sustainable. And you alluded to this in your remarks. Businesses have bottom lines, and thankfully I work for a corporation where our bottom line is never at odds with our mission. We're 100 years old, 2 CEOs in the 100 years, our founder and his son, who's our current CEO, both teachers. Like, the mission is ingrained in the fabric of everybody that works at Scholastic 100%. But that being said, we have shareholders that we're responsible to, and so we have to drive revenue, and we can't give books away if we can't make revenue. So when you come to partners, come to us as partners, and we come to you as partners. We want to, at the end of the day, give more than we get. But it has to be a reciprocal relationship in some manner, and it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, whatever it is, but it has to be, everybody has to have skin in the game, and everybody has to be getting some level of benefit in order for it to be sustainable. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll just add, we've had a couple initiatives where we started the initiative with schools, then they changed the rules on us, and it was like, well, why are we doing this? Because this has now become more trouble than it's worth, and we don't see the benefit. You know, we think there's less. We think the schools are getting less, and we're not getting anything on. And literally, there's been some initiatives where we've walked away,
right.
because it just didn't make any sense anymore. So, yeah, that's, I think, a really, really good point.
I think one piece of advice from where I sit at the federal level is to try to keep issues bipartisan as much as possible. I mean, literacy is certainly a bipartisan issue, but often I find that I'm talking to my Republican counterpart and I'm like, we need to do this thing about childcare. Everybody's coming in saying it's too expensive. And we're like, no one's telling me that. That's a bad example, but something's broken. I've had 20 meetings this week, and they're like, oh, I haven't had any meetings about that. And why? Then I blame her because she doesn't understand the problem, but no one's talking to her because they're scared of her because she's a Republican and they think she won't understand or they think she won't care. Right. But actually, she's a person too, and she understands these issues, and she's very smart. And there's no reason that every meeting that happens on the Democratic side shouldn't happen on the Republican side. And I think Scholastic's done a great job with that. Obviously, the NGA is very bipartisan, but it helps us do our jobs as Democrats if we are making sure that the Republicans are hearing the same messages. And I think another piece from the federal level, there are critical points that we do things, and it's rare. I know it's very rare, but we actually have a ton of really critical points right now when you think about literacy. Right now is the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. We are in basically the first year of interventions for schools that are struggling. We have a standalone literacy program that we worked on together for a very long time, but that is just a standalone program. Literacy is all over ESSA. I mean, every struggling school, most struggling schools have a literacy problem. And so one thing that we need to be thinking about is just as states are implementing all of these new systems, making sure that literacy is a part of that and being at the table is really important, and not being like, oh, the federal government, they suck, they can't do anything, it's probably irrelevant. For 14 years, we might have been in the way. We're actually trying to help now and push states to do things differently. So, and then with childcare and early learning, it's also a really exciting time. We just got the biggest increase in childcare funding ever in FY18 in a Republican Congress with a Republican administration. And so we're seeing states make all sorts of decisions right now about how to spend that money. They can spend that money on preschool, they can spend that money on new literacy interventions, they can spend it on professional development, on pay, and there's a lot of flexibility at the federal level. And so I think making sure that you're a part of those conversations is important too.
Great. And that you're electing people that actually talk about education once in a blue moon, because, I mean, think about your past presidential elections. Was education a top issue at all during them? No, and that's BS. So
we're paying the price.
Yeah, hold your elected officials accountable, and whether you're at a town hall or whatever you're at, ask them about education, where they stand on it. So it's it needs to be infused back into the national dialogue, because it's just like literacy. It's great, but it's taken care of, right? And it's no, we're here because RIF is bringing the fact that there's a literacy crisis, which I'm glad you guys are referring to it as that in this country. So we need to, and I'm new to education as of 8 years ago. When I joined Scholastic, I did every other issue, right? And I didn't know there was a crisis, and I'm sort of probably upper middle class, well educated. I didn't know that kids in this country can't read. I don't have any, so But my point is,
so yours
that
are fine.
Everybody does not know this, and so it needs to be something that there's a light shown on, and it's a solvable problem, which not all of ours are. So.
Yeah, and watch the races, watch what's happening in those, and listen to what your elected officials are saying. When you hear an opening, or if you don't hear that opening, ask the question. Say, what's your stance on? People like us are monitoring that very carefully to find out, so we can follow up. But you got to ask the questions.
So one last question before we open to the audience. Think about challenges, or maybe a lesson learned where you thought you were doing something that you thought was going to be great and it didn't work out that way. What are some of the pitfalls that we can, that we can avoid going forward? I'll let anybody start with
Well,
this.
I'll start because mine's the flip side of sort of what I was saying before, and it's really if you try to get a champion that is going to be a short-term champion or going to be somebody who has this as just sort of the thing that they're going to bless and then walk away from, you're not going to get the benefit. Like, you have to find champions with whatever your issue is that's going to stick with it, that really has a long investment in it. And I think this goes back to what Jesse was saying about when you come to a partner, come with partnership in mind and come with something that you're offering. Because then if you go to a partner who has a deep investment, then it will sustain, it will last. So I think that's what I would say.
Great.
I mean, on like the micro level, I would have made sure we did the professional development as a contingency upon giving away the books for that federal piece. But that's sort of hindsight. I think walk away with meaningful partnerships, sustainability, transparency. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've covered it.
Great. Thank you.
I think just remembering that politics, at least, is a repeated game, and we are consistently working with the same. My intern is going to be in charge of me in 5 years. I'm working with the same Republicans. They're all moving in and out of this revolving door. So I think like understanding that every interaction you have is going to be a repeat interaction at someday. I mean, it helps us in negotiations to not like shove each other off the cliff or whatever we're going to do, lock each other out of rooms. We've done that before. But I think that's helped me, just remembering that repeated game. Like, I'm going to see him again. Don't be an asshole. Even
That's why we're off the record.
Right. It makes it, now I feel so safe. I know. I'm like, it's fine.
The one thing that I would add to this is, my day job is public relations. I mean, that's what I actually do for a living. That's why I get paid. And Jessie made a great point. Up until she entered education 8 years ago, she didn't know there was a literacy crisis in this country. And as much as we all know it in this room, as much as we're all committed to it in this room, as much as we've just spent a day talking about it, okay, we need to learn to shout it from the mountaintops. Mm-hmm. I mean, we need to develop, in my perspective, communication strategies that bring this to the forefront. Why is the opioid crisis, on every front page of every newspaper and every TV broadcast, and the literacy crisis is not? Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, from a PR perspective, I think we've got to rethink how we tell this message and be more aggressive and make more people aware, because until we have that awareness, we're going to be spinning our wheels.
Well, and the adverse effects that it has is not just that a kid can't pick up a book and read. Right. It's prison pipeline. It's health effects. It's I mean, it's a legitimate societal problem.
Absolutely.
They'll be in Congress later.
That's off the record as well.
That was Beth Karen.
Couldn't help myself.
So we do have some time for audience questions, if there are any. We have a couple. Why don't we start right here? Right here in the middle.
Oh, should we just go ahead?
They're coming.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I come from a state Michigan, that is number 47, I believe, in the state ranking for literacy. And we are going to have a new governor this year. I have a good hope that it's going to be a pro-education governor. My question is, in Michigan, there isn't even an understanding. I'm in the second largest school district in that state. They don't even require the head of library and information in that public school district to have even a BA, much less a degree in library. I'm not sure where to start. Like, this whole thing has got to change from a really base level. We definitely don't require, we have parapros that staff the libraries, and sometimes we don't even have that. Where can I start with this new administration coming in? I know I will have support from our mayor in town. Do I start with her and try to go through that way, or are there some other channels that you would recommend?
I would say every channel you can find, right? Get the PTA folks talking to the people that they know. Now the thing, when you get a governor, they have to then search around and find their staff. So there's campaign people, there's all kinds of folks who are coming in. Those people are going to have the ear of the governor and an involvement, but the governor's probably not the one that's going to make the most difference in a case like that. I would talk to the National Conference of State Legislators and talk about who your legislators are in your state, because that's where you're going to make those kinds of improvements, where you're going to actually pass a bill that's going to have, you know, an impact on what teachers know and can do, and what licensure people have and certificates and that kind of thing. So I would say use every angle you can find, right? Find all of the advocates and the folks that you know of in your state who are interested in this. Talk to the grade level reading people. Talk to the Librarians Association. Like, find anyone you can find, and because you're not going to know exactly who's going to be the one who has the right year, but the more communications you have, the more likely you are to find the advocates who can help.
Yeah, I would add taking my Scholastic hat off and putting my political campaign hat back on. It has to be top down and bottom up, right? Like, they have to feel pressure from the top, and they have to understand that it's important from a grassroots perspective. So reach out to ALA, because they may have resources that they're willing to put into a statewide effort of some nature. Everything you said about the librarians and all of the local people, but also engage the campaign, whoever looks like he or she is going to win that race. I forget who you've got over in Michigan. But engage the campaign, because that's where the staff people come from. And staff people are more important than their members mostly. Like, I rarely go to the Hill and lobby the actual staff. I mean, the actual congressional people, because having worked on the Hill, I know that the senator would come to whomever and say, what should we be, you know, or staff people take it to. So I would say you need to contact the campaign, find out who's working on the education as an issue. If it's gubernatorial, they may have one or two issues people. Befriend that person, talk to that person, get on that person's radar. That person likely will be the education person, or someone that has education under them in the governor's office. And it matters when you're new to office and you're hearing from constituents. So there's, you know, earned media, there's op-eds, there's editorials, so you have to really, it's work, as you know, but if you're in a crisis situation, you need legislators to change the law, obviously, in terms of what the accreditations are and things of that nature. And in the meantime, maybe you get professional learning for these librarians. But yeah, it's sorry. It's not easy.
You got this. You got this.
Thank you. You have a question back here?
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for your insights, both on and off the record today.
All off.
Okay. So it seems to me that one of the unique challenges that we have in literacy in this day and age is a bit of a mistrust of it, or almost an antagonism towards it. I'm thinking particularly of the 2016 elections, and how that was, I think, the first time that I ever heard this idea of reading or speaking at a 5th or 4th grade level is something that was celebrated. And speaking higher than that level was something that people didn't understand, or they felt threatened by, or it isolated the speaker from the audience, which I do think is indicative of the problem that we do have a literacy crisis in the States right now. But those are the very people that we are also needing to be partnering with. They are the parents, they are the community members, the people that we're coming and saying that there is a literacy problem, let's educate your children, and they're the ones who are mistrustful of literacy. So I'm curious, from that perspective, how can we connect with them? How do we address the mistrust there? And what might you all be doing about that as well in your roles?
I'll start on this one if I can. I think regardless of who you are in this country and what your economic status is or your education level is, that all parents, and this is a common misperception I think among a lot of educators actually and people, is all parents want their children to do better than they've done, to know more than they've done, to achieve more than they've done. So I think the degree to which you can implore whomever it is that you're talking to that this is a way for your child to be successful in life, I think is your entry point. And what we're doing in terms of that is we see family and community engagement, which is sort of a buzz term in the education world these days, but is a very real thing. We see it as a huge game changer in terms of school turnaround and student achievement. And so we've dedicated the last 8 years of a piece of our work in terms of educating educators on how to more effectively engage parents in the community. It's not just back to school night, it's not open house, it's actually teaching parents how to meaningfully engage with their kids and their learning, to know what they should know, when they should know it, and how they can help support them at home with that. Parents are kids' first teachers, so, and they all want better for their children than they had, so I think that's your entry point, and I think from a education publishing perspective, we are doing what we can for professional learning in schools across the country to help educators, both from superintendents to principals to actual teachers, figure out how to be more welcoming to families and how to empower them to help them teach their children. So,
And I'll comment on that just to say that I think that's right, spot on. And it's meeting people where they are, but it's also making sure that we don't think about and talk about literacy as some kind of an elitist thing that, so you can go to Yale, right? It's not just a thing to get you to go to Yale. It is something that we all need if you want a good job. Do you want to be able to take care of yourself when you get older? Like, do you need the basic things in life? Can you read the manual for how to hook up your television and get that remote? No, I can't. Get the remote controller, right?
so true.
It's the only reason I got married is because I cannot work my own hours. But it's meeting people where they are, and it's trying to help them understand how this is valuable to them and why it matters, and it is really helping the parents with that two-generational approach. So I think that's really an important point.
Absolutely.
I'd say I completely agree on all of these things. I think we can learn a lot from Head Start. Head Start's one of my favorite programs. And one of the reasons it is one of my favorite programs is because you have parents coming to the Hill and talking about their leadership and their engagement with other parents. And they say, when we have parents, the other day we had a parent who came to a congressional breakfast for a senator who was not on our Child Care for Working Families Act, which is our big child care bill. And she said, why are you not on this child care bill? And the senator said, well, my housing's really expensive. And she said, well, child care's really expensive. And she said, well, I'll talk to my staff. And she was like, no, I want you to get on the bill right now. I'm going to follow up with you. But that's the kind of engagement we have with Head Start parents. They care so much, and they are involved in decision making, and that's what makes them incredible advocates and incredible advocates to other parents. And so I think you hear from Head Start parents all the time that they go into K-12 and the school district says, oh, we don't need you anymore. You can be in the PTA, you can have a bake sale. And they're like, no, I want to make decisions about who the director of our program is. I want to vote on that. And so I think there's something we can learn from that sort of parent engagement and how that translates to how parents are acting at home and how they're working with their kids that is really invaluable.
Well, I think our time is about up, so thank you for being a terrific audience. And
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
thank you very much to everyone.